California, a crucial bridge is left hanging in the balance.
I immediately thought, this is major. Something is going to happen to this bridge.
In Germany, tragedy strikes one of the world's fastest passenger trains.
What we saw was a completely destroyed ICE train looking like a horror movie.
A casino inferno in Las Vegas triggers a massive rescue mission.
People hanging out in the windows and the balconies, just screaming and asking for help.
And in Australia, an apartment building that gave residents a sinking feeling.
The police said, "You got to get out. You got to get out now."
With big bills, even the smallest fail can trigger a huge disaster. From miscalculations to misunderstandings, or just plain bad luck. These catastrophes are every engineer's worst nightmare. With everything they create, engineers must build strong to stand the test of time. But for some structures, time is not on their side. Like this failure in California that sliced a scenic highway in two.
Soil's going to go, and it's going to bring the bridge down. This is going to be bad.
Leaving a community cut off from the outside world.
It's the only road in and out of the area. There is no other way to get out.
Can we survive with an absence of any sort of alternative route?
Triggering a mission to reconnect this vital roadway.
There were calls put out immediately. Time was of the essence.
Big Sur, California. This stunning stretch of the Pacific coast is one of the nation's top tourist destinations, with jagged sloping cliffs and clear ocean views. Kyle Evans is a local photographer.
Even after living here my entire life, I still pay attention to the sheer beauty and awesomeness of the coastline.
And arguably the best way to see this stunning scenery is by car.
Right now we're driving north on Highway 1, very famous stretch of highway, and very beautiful.
This iconic road runs for over 1,000 kilometers along the Pacific Ocean, earning it the name the Pacific Coast Highway.
A lot of people come from all over the world just to drive on this road.
The jagged terrain that characterizes the scenic drive is difficult to cross. So Highway 1 depends on a series of bridges. None more spectacular than this.
The Bixby Creek Bridge is one of the most photographed bridges around, but this highway depends on dozens of other crossings, some that you'd even miss at the blink of an eye.
Like here at Pfeiffer Canyon. This span was built in 2017, but its equally unassuming predecessor bridged the gap for nearly 5 decades. Kirk Gaffel is a local restaurant owner.
The Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge was a bridge that most people in Big Sur who lived their whole lives never even knew the name of. They don't even think of it as a bridge. The lay of the land there was such that you just drove over it before you even knew it.
It might not be the flashiest crossing on the Pacific Coast Highway, but every bridge here plays a vital role.
We depend on it to an extreme depth because it's the only road in and out of the area. There is no other way to get out if the road closes.
For almost 50 years, the Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge performed a central yet unsung part in this scenic highway. But Mother Nature would soon drag it into the spotlight. January 2017. This stretch of the California coast was in the midst of an unusually wet winter.
Late December, early January, it started raining, and it just didn't stop. And one particular weekend, we had a huge storm roll through, and it dumped more water than I think I've ever seen in my entire life.
Kyle knew heavy rain could wreak havoc on the steep coastline, so he went to check for trouble.
Along the coast here, there's a lot of landslides and rock slides and trees down. It's a pretty common occurrence. So it's a regular thing since I was a kid when we had a particularly bad storm to go out and check out the impact of that storm.
As residents explored, they discovered that the road south was blocked by a huge landslide, and on the northbound side, the Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge was in dire straits.
We came down after the biggest part of the storm. The bridge was already damaged enough. We knew that there was going to be a major problem.
California Department of Transportation engineer Jason Wilcox and his team headed to the scene. The damage stopped them in their tracks.
We came down and we saw the cracks in the soil. We saw that the soil was actually separating. And then we look and we see that column 3 was actually sliding down the hill.
With a tilting column, Jason knew the bridge could fail at any minute.
I immediately thought, this is major. Something is going to happen to this bridge.
We subsequently heard that it was getting worse, and there was the possibility of the highway being closed there.
Sure enough, engineers deemed the bridge unsafe, and the Pacific Coast Highway was shut down, with no alternative routes available.
The bridge is in a particularly steep canyon, and so there's nowhere to put in a temporary road around it.
Not only was one of America's most scenic roads sliced in two, the people of Big Sur were cut off from the outside world.
This highway is the lifeblood of this area. We use it to get to work, we use it to get to school, we use it to keep our economy going.
As Caltrans worked to find a solution, the community pulled together.
Multiple portions of the community were isolated, and we started thinking of ourselves more as an island than anything else.
One thing was for sure, in this rugged, steep terrain, there would be no quick fix. With this vital lifeline shut down, engineers had two challenges: to reconnect the community and to understand what had caused the collapse, starting with the original construction method.
In the 1960s, reinforced concrete bridges like the Pfeiffer Canyon were fairly advanced technology. Although they're still in use today, when it comes to long spans, they have their limits.
Concrete can only span so far before it needs to be held up by a support of some sort or another. And in this case, there were two columns.
Where the columns met the canyon floor, they were supported by foundations called spread footings.
A spread footing is exactly what it sounds like. You take the load from above and spread it widely across the ground.
The problem here was that water pouring down the canyon had been eroding away the soil supporting those footings.
Over time, a little piece will slough off. As it gets saturated, the cohesion of the soil itself decreases as it's exposed to the atmosphere. And so then it'll slowly slough off, and then more will slough off.
Over nearly 5 decades, this process had gradually undermined the spread footing. And the storm in January 2017 was the final straw.
This side of the hillside just got either more wet or it just didn't have the capacity to hold that load up anymore.
Ultimately, the massive washouts from that wet winter tipped the balance, and the bridge was doomed. With the community of Big Sur cut off from the north, engineers knew they had to replace the bridge, and fast. The first step was to remove the damaged spans.
Working beside such a steep, deep canyon with unreliable ground below, the only safe option for demolition was simple: brute force.
While demolition continued, engineers were already at work on the replacement bridge. This time, to eliminate the need for columns in the canyon floor, the structure would be made from steel.
A steel bridge would be much stronger than the concrete original and capable of spanning the entire canyon unsupported.
7 months after the failure, the 900-ton replacement bridge was launched across the canyon and guided to rest on brand new abutments, safely set back from the canyon's edge.
The new bridge is supported by a southern abutment and a northern abutment, just to make sure the new abutment was pushed further back so that continual erosion won't become an issue.
The team knew residents and businesses were depending on them, so with the steel span secured, crews worked around the clock to get the concrete deck in place.
We would go up and look to see the incremental changes, and we were seeing the new bridge in the various stages. And it became evident that, oh my God, we can survive this. And that was a really freeing kind of moment.
This project itself would take typically 8 to 9 years to go through, and we did it in, I think, 10 months.
In October 2017, the new Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge and this section of the Pacific Coast Highway finally reopened to traffic.
The whole experience made me appreciate how everyone came together during that closure of the bridge and helped each other out as much as possible so that we could get through the road closure.
The day that the bridge was open, you could tell that everybody was very excited. True to Big Sur style, they had banjo playing. There were some historic vehicles actually that drove across it as well. You could tell everybody was very happy.
Even today, I marvel at what an extraordinary job Caltrans and all the powers that be that came together working cooperatively. This was a real success story.
When engineers push the boundaries, technology is tested like never before. Any weakness, no matter how small, can trigger a major catastrophe. Like this story in Germany that sent shockwaves across a nation.
I knew that this was one of the biggest disasters in German railway history ever.
Hat mich dann im Zug umeinander gehauen, von links nach rechts, nach oben nach unten.
An unbelievable chain of events that led to tragedy.
The scale of this disaster was unimaginable, and yet it was triggered by the tiniest of flaws.
Germany. Since 1991, the Intercity Express, or ICE train, has connected the country, with lines spreading from east to west and north to south. Hannes Berkhoff is a journalist.
This is an ICE train which can go up to 300 kilometers per hour, so it's the backbone of Germany's high-speed railway system. And it's a good way to travel in Germany while being comfortable, riding fast and smooth.
The ICE shaved hours off cross-country journeys. But as with many ambitious feats of engineering, there were some bumps along the way. Bernard Weiser is a mechanical engineer.
From the beginning on, they had strong problems with vibration and shaking, rattling problems, especially in the restaurant wagons.
Folks riding on the train told the staff that they feel a little uncomfortable in riding the train, especially on higher speeds, got a little shaky.
The vibrations could be caused by imperfections in the rails, the solid steel wheels, or both. To address the problem, it was determined that a wide-scale fix was needed.
So considered as the best solution at that time was to use rubber-sprung wheels.
Rubber-sprung wheels have been used on trams or streetcars for years. Initially, to reduce noise in city centers, but as a bonus, they gave passengers a much smoother ride.
So this is the outer component. Then we have here the rubber components in circumferential direction, and under this rubber we have the steel disc of the wheel itself.
The rubber-sprung wheels were introduced around 1 year after the ICE trains came into use, and passengers enjoyed the welcome upgrade.
The new wheel was introduced At first in a restaurant wagon, but then with the time also in other wagons. And this made the operation much smoother. The damping effect was shown that it works fine.
Dozens of ICE trains with rubber-sprung wheels were now hurtling around the country, carrying thousands of passengers a day. Although no one knew it, disaster was looming. Early morning, June the 3rd, 1998. A first-generation ICE train with 2 locomotives and 12 passenger cars left Munich, heading north to Hamburg. At 9:05 a.m., Udo Bauch boarded the train at Fulda.
Meine Stimmung auf dem Weg zum Bahnhof war gut. Ich war motiviert. Ich habe mich auf die Tagung in Hamburg gefreut.
Udo sat towards the rear of the train.
Habe mich ganz normal hingesetzt, meinen Laptop aufgemacht, gearbeitet und geschrieben und Statistiken durchgeschaut und Kaffee zwischendurch getrunken.
Just before 11 a.m., the smooth ride was disturbed.
The passengers in one car noticed a rumble and it was quite noisy.
Es passiert immer mal wieder, dass der Zug ein bisschen wackelt, wenn er irgendwie in Schienen, in die Weichen einfährt oder sonst abbremst. Aber für mich war überhaupt nicht.
Udo didn't know it yet, but the day was about to take a dramatic turn. Passengers in the first car had discovered the source of the rumble, a broken wheel.
One part of the wheel slammed through the bottom of the car so they could see the steel coming through, but before staff could be noticed, disaster struck.
Und ich habe erst diesen Aufprall wahrgenommen, diesen Schlag, diesen unheimlichen Schlag. Und dann ging es ganz, ganz schnell.
The train derailed and smashed into a bridge just south of Eschede.
Bin ich dann voller Schmerzen liegen geblieben und wusste, jetzt ist das Leben möglicherweise bald zu Ende.
Hannes Berkhoff was in the newsroom when he learned of the disaster.
It was almost quiet and the sky was blue. It was a wonderful day, and you look down and look into something looking like a horror movie, and you can't believe your eyes. What we saw was a completely destroyed ICE train, which looked like an accordion.
Udo was trapped in the wreckage and badly injured. His memory of the traumatic event is cloudy.
Da hat man später gesagt, dass man einfach das vergisst, diesen Zeitpunkt. Der Körper hat auf Notsituationen umgestellt, Notfallplan, und dann kann man sich an die Einzelheiten nicht mehr erinnern. Also
Hundreds of first responders were on the scene.
You could see the professionalism of rescue teams unfolding every minute. I think most of them couldn't believe their eyes, but they worked and they tried to help as many people as they could.
Miraculously, Udo survived, one of more than 100 injured in the accident. But tragically, the death toll climbed for days. The collision ultimately claimed 101 lives. While the rescue operation continued, investigators were already on the scene, trying to understand what had happened. Based on reports of the wheel puncturing the carriage floor, they retraced the train's route and found damaged sleepers in the tracks a few kilometers before the crash site.
Investigators concluded that the broken wheel under the first passenger carriage had hit a control switch, causing the carriages behind to move to an adjacent track, derailing the rest of the train.
That explained the derailment. Now, the key question was, why had the wheel initially failed? The debris was sent for analysis at the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Materials Science and Technology. Engineer Bernhard Weisser was on the investigation team.
Rubber sprung wheels. It was a technology that was already used for tramways and commuter trains, but not on fast trains. So the safety issues like service loads were more or less unknown.
Inspection of the broken wheel's outer rim revealed that a crack had been growing slowly for some time, hidden from sight.
A fatigue crack was initiated here inside of the rim. It started here and then grow until the outer side. So of course it was very difficult, even with an inspection, to recognize it because it was starting from inside.
Engineers needed to know if other wheels were also at risk, so the team ran computer modeling and physical testing of rim samples.
This is where the crack occurs. It's just here on this edge in the middle of the segment where the crack initiated.
It turned out the dynamic forces in the three-part wheel were focusing stress at the inner point of the rim.
The stress that happened here in the rim were high enough for a crack to grow. So within probably a couple of trips, this crack was growing and growing and growing until just one cycle was enough for the rim to break.
The investigation had proven that any crack in a rim could trigger a failure. Next, they wanted to understand what could have caused the crack to form in the first place.
The investigation had shown that there were no material flaws or defects at that location where the crack was initiated.
With no flaws to trigger the crack, the initial cause of the failure remains a mystery.
That the crack propagates at this loading was clearly answered, but why the crack was initiated until today still remains unknown.
But with the risk of failure established, officials ordered an inspection of rubber-sprung wheels across the ICE fleet.
3 different wheels showed cracks on the rim, which were very similar to that what happened. So it was only a question of time when the next accident would have happened.
By the time of the accident in 1998, updated ICE models were joining the fleet, correcting issues that had occurred in the original Mark I.
With the new versions, engineers already had plans to soften the ride without the need for rubber-sprung wheels. Instead, they used pneumatic suspension, allowing rail cars to run smoothly on solid steel wheels.
Within weeks, rubber-sprung wheels on all Mark I trains were replaced with solid steel. But the echoes of the tragedy still reverberate for survivors and witnesses alike.
Ich habe also viele Fälle kennengelernt, die auch verletzt wurden und die geliebte Menschen verloren haben. Deswegen erzähle ich immer wieder über dieses Unglück, weil es darf nie mehr sowas passieren.
In 2001, a memorial was unveiled beside the tracks at Eschede to forever remember the disaster.
The reminder is to the helping hands as well, and all the inhabitants of Eschede who have borne the task of helping, even if it was hard to do so.
In everything they do, engineers must always consider the worst-case scenario. Because if things go wrong, the results can be devastating. Like this catastrophe in Nevada, a deadly disaster at a luxury resort.
Anytime you get a call at 6:30 in the morning, all hell is breaking loose somewhere.
One of the worst hotel fires in US history.
Nobody could believe what was happening. I'd never seen anything like it. It was just a horrific scene.
A tragedy that required a desperate rescue effort and triggered a change in the law.
This disaster was a watershed moment in the history of fire safety.
Las Vegas, Nevada is a gambling hotspot with a colorful past. Norm Clark has been a long-time reporter on the streets of Sin City.
I think it has an aura that few cities have. It's definitely a special place for me because I've covered so many fascinating stories here over the years. The energy is unbelievable.
In the 1970s, booming business drove a building bonanza and the phenomenon of the combined mega resort and casino. This building was one of the first. Opened in December 1973, it was originally owned by a global entertainment company.
What they always say about Las Vegas is it's a city that reinvents itself, and it truly was a gem, the hottest casino in town.
At the time, this wasn't just the biggest complex in Vegas, but the largest resort hotel in the world.
Slot machine mechanic Charlie Lombardo was proud to land a job at the hottest spot in town.
It was the #1 casino to work at. It had 2,000 rooms, 1,000 slot machines, 100 tables between the casino and the shows and the restaurants. It was the place to be in Las Vegas.
But the building that helped change the face and fortunes of Vegas was also about to change the law. November the 21st, 1980, at 7:17 in the morning, while most guests were still in their rooms, the Clark County Fire Department received an emergency call. Charlie was at work, heading towards the casino floor.
There was an announcement, please evacuate the casino area. I walked back to the casino, and when I opened the door, it was full of smoke. Full of smoke.
Charlie realized that workers back in the count rooms were unaware of the call to evacuate.
So I went and grabbed everybody because I knew they didn't hear the announcement. I thought we were going to walk outside, and a few minutes later we'd be going back in, everything would be all clear.
But Charlie and his colleagues had made it out, just in time. Within seconds, a huge fireball engulfed the entire casino floor.
The flames were just gigantic. I had seen fires before, but nothing like this. Absolutely nothing.
The heat was so intense, it melted slot machines. Reporter Norm Clark was stunned by the sheer scale of the inferno.
I looked over and I saw big pillars of smoke coming down. I knew it was going to be bad. I still wasn't prepared for it.
We're all in shock, just staring, trying to figure out what was going on, what could have happened.
While firefighters tackled the blaze, smoke was engulfing the 26-story building. Many of the guests were now trapped.
People hanging out in the buildings and the windows and the balconies, just screaming and asking for help. It's a terrible sight to see because there was nothing you could do to help them.
An urgent call went out to nearby Nellis Air Force Base, around 20 kilometers away.
It really was a call to arms. They had some big helicopters came over, and they were actually taking people off the roof.
9 helicopters raced to the disaster. But despite the incredible efforts of all involved, sadly, not everyone could be saved.
If those helicopters hadn't been there, a lot more people would have died.
Of the estimated 5,000 guests and staff in the hotel at the time, more than 700 were injured, and tragically, 85 lost their lives.
Anytime you got a story like that, your first reaction is, I'd rather be anywhere but here. But that's your job. It kept me awake for quite a long time.
This was one of the worst hotel fires in US history, and it left the nation reeling.
It was the place to be in Las Vegas. I mean, it was the #1 hotel casino, and now it was gone. It was devastated.
The authorities immediately launched a wide-reaching investigation to uncover where the blaze had started and why it had been so deadly. now a fire investigator like his dad before him. Tim Lomprey was just 17 when his father was called in to examine the devastation.
3 days after the fire, my dad asked me if I wanted to go inside. The enormity of the destruction. It was overwhelming.
The first clue to the fire's origin came from an employee who triggered the alarm after seeing flames coming from a restaurant wall and rising to the ceiling. In the wreckage, investigators found the source: an electrical fault.
The fire occurred when there was a short circuit. The insulation on the copper melted and then caught on fire. So you have a very small fire, manageable fire.
The fire might have started small, but the building was only partially equipped with emergency sprinklers.
When this resort was built, there were no specific fire regulations requiring sprinklers for this type of building.
Although it was fully compliant, the resort only had a limited sprinkler system, and none in the restaurant or in the casino. So what began as a small fire quickly spread out of control.
The flames weren't the only problem. The accumulating smoke was becoming dangerously hot.
Once smoke reaches its combustibility point, it will ignite. So once that ignited, you had a fireball that rolled across the casino and out the front door. That fireball was approximately 350 feet long. So you can imagine how fast that crossed that casino floor.
The fireball engulfed the ground floor in about 20 seconds. Meanwhile, the blaze continued spreading, hidden within the ceiling and walls.
We had a fire that was gaining on itself and consuming the interior of the walls.
Undetected, this fire was also spreading massive amounts of deadly smoke.
Smoke was traveling along the elevator shafts and the corridors. But worst of all, the air conditioning unit was moving it throughout the entire hotel.
The air conditioning system itself became the conveyor of all this smoke. It was pumping that toxic gas everywhere in that building.
Although firefighters managed to halt the blaze at the second floor, the smoke had already spread far and wide.
Even though the fire had been contained, the venting system was acting like a giant chimney with deadly results.
Most of the fatalities were found on the upper floors because those gases from the fire went up, just like a hot air balloon.
Once the fire took hold, there was no warning system to alert visitors and employees of the spreading smoke.
There were no smoke detectors, there were no vent detectors, there were no flue detectors, there's nothing. People didn't know. It was built to code. Everything was safe, everything was effective, until it wasn't.
Shortly after the tragedy, the governor set up a special fire safety commission, and the state of Nevada passed one of the toughest fire safety laws in the entire country.
It's affected me, without a doubt. But what I was most impressed about Las Vegas is they immediately, within a year, had changed their fire safety rules. Message was, we're going to keep you safe here.
It actually changed the laws and the rules and the regulations, the building codes, not only here in Las Vegas and Nevada, but around the world.
In addition to improving fire and smoke detection systems, sprinklers would now be required in all hotels, old and new. And this resort went on to rise from the ashes, complete with state-of-the-art fire safety systems.
Every room was now going to have a smoke detector. Every room was now going to have at least one sprinkler. So when you can think of almost any safety feature that would make a hotel better, that all happened because of this.
Just 8 months after the disaster, the hotel reopened. Today, it still stands as a reminder of this tragic wake-up call for an entire industry.
It changed how hotels and casinos were built forever. And because of that, there should never, ever, ever be another catastrophe like the one we saw here.
In engineering, every element from the foundations up plays a crucial role. If just one thing goes wrong, the results can be catastrophic. Like this story in Australia, a disaster with potentially devastating consequences.
This apartment complex was in danger of literally cracking apart,
as shocked residents were forced to flee.
The police said, you got to get out, you got to get out now.
Leaving their homes, leaving their furniture, leaving all of their precious belongings behind.
An engineering mystery that uprooted a community.
It's all gone. There's nothing here for us anymore. It's just been a nightmare.
Sydney is Australia's largest city and one of the most desirable places to live on Earth.
Sydney's population has been growing steadily for decades, and there's always been a high demand for new housing. In an already crowded city, one of the best solutions has been to build up.
And high-rises are going up quickly in Mascot, a suburb of Sydney. Lizzie Pearl is a local reporter.
Mascot is a suburb which is pretty much the gateway to the city. It's where Sydney's international airport is. And we've seen a lot of high-rise residential tower structures going up in and around that suburb.
Towers like this 10-storey apartment complex. Anthony Najafian was drawn in by the affordable high-rise lifestyle.
We love the area, the location, the convenience, the community, being smack bang in the centre of Sydney. A place that we would be able to live our future on.
Completed in 2008, the tower had 132 residential units, as well as shops and restaurants, with basement parking below. Up above, Tracy Sheehan was looking forward to the vistas from the top floor.
So literally this is what attracted us to the unit, the view. When we first moved in here, there was none of these buildings around. Yeah, the view's just stunning.
This would have been a really, really smart investment. It's close to the city. The value of those apartments was going to skyrocket.
But while the view and opportunities were looking up, the ground below was about to tear this high-rise community apart. Friday evening, June the 14th, 2019. Resident Tracy Sheehan was in her apartment, getting ready for the weekend. When out of the blue, occupants were told to leave the building.
The announcement went over the speakers saying we needed to evacuate and we needed to get out. It was crazy, it was crazy. So I thought, pack a few things and prepare to leave.
The first thing we thought was, this must be some sort of mistake.
But this was no mistake. Engineers had been inspecting cracks in the basement and were concerned that the building was unsafe. First responders rushed to the scene to oversee the evacuation.
It was serious. The police said, you got to get out, you got to get out now.
This wasn't just 1 or 2 units. Every resident in the building had been ordered to leave from all 132 apartments.
Once evacuated, the 10-storey building was shut down and sealed off.
Our doors were locked and we had to leave. But it shouldn't happen, it just shouldn't happen.
For many, their dream home had become a living nightmare.
We were out on the streets, basically.
With the building off limits, the nearby town hall became a temporary shelter. And early the next morning, reporter Lizzie Pearl witnessed residents' anguish firsthand.
I went down there, freezing cold morning, and there were a couple of people, I guess the look on their face was really just told the story of the trauma of the night before. We could see the cracks from the road.
Residents already knew cracks were being monitored in the basement, but they had no idea how serious the problem had become.
Not only were the cracks suddenly getting worse, most worryingly, they were also found in a key structural element of the tower called a transverse slab beam.
These reinforced concrete horizontal slabs are designed to transfer the load from the structure above down to the ground through multiple columns. If a slab fails, the entire building could be at risk.
Engineers had installed emergency props to support the transverse slab beam, but just a day later, they deemed the entire building unsafe and ordered the evacuation.
The big question was, why had the beams cracked in the first place? It seemed the answer could lie in the ground beneath the tower.
The area south of central Sydney is now a prime location, but much of it was once swampland. And even though the marshy land was filled in, the geology around here can still prove challenging for engineers, particularly when it comes to the foundations.
The location of the cracks suggested a damaging phenomenon known as differential settlement.
Most structures are expected to settle in the years after construction. But when it happens more on one side compared to the other, that difference can undermine the integrity of the entire building.
Behzad Fatoyi is a professor of geotechnical engineering.
If you see fair bit of cracks at the basement level or just above in the slabs, in the connections, there is a chance that the foundations experience differential settlement.
The next question was what was behind the differential settlement. There were reports of existing problems, like leaks and poor joints, which might have contributed. But there was another theory.
Very early on, eyes very quickly went to the neighbours. A building next door which was being excavated to be another high-rise apartment block, just metres away.
There were times when we saw the building visibly shaking during the construction.
You could feel it move, you could actually feel it.
The theory suggests that excavation work for the new building's foundation caused a loss of material from beneath the older tower, triggering differential settlement and cracking in the northeastern corner. The neighbours denied they were at fault, but whatever the cause, if differential settlement goes unchecked, it can have serious consequences.
If it's too much, it will start to topple.
While the cause remains a mystery, the government provided financial support for those affected by the building's closure, but it won't cover the long-term impact.
These are working people who thought they were making a good investment. It's just been a hopeless situation. There's no way out.
No one should have to go through this, where one building can completely uproot a community. It just doesn't make sense.
Emergency measures continue to prop up the 10-storey building, and residents' hopes of returning to their homes are fading. Following the failure, the inquiry led to new statewide legislation imposing a shared responsibility on project partners to prevent economic loss caused by issues like this.
Well, there's been major sweeping reforms announced by the New South Wales government in the wake of what's happened. There is now a lot more oversight in the industry.
But it's too late for this tower, and with the issue unresolved, for residents, it seems there is no end in sight.
I just don't understand why it can't be fixed. I just think it's outrageous. It's been really tough.
So where we are now is in one giant mess. The people who own apartments are in limbo. We don't know if it can be rebuilt, we don't know if it has to be demolished, we don't know if it can be repaired. But they certainly can't sell their places. Who is going to buy the risk and the stigma that is now attached to that name?